Peter Mesnick.
That's very nice, but I'm supposed to say the introduction, so let's unshare the screen.
I did. What is this? What do you think? I'm an amateur here? Come on.
I think you're an amateur on webinars, but maybe not. I'm an amateur.
Just wait.
Okay.
Nobody does a webinar like I do a webinar. Let me tell you, Bubbler.
Okay, we had 121 people that hear that. So welcome everybody. This is a first CSP official webinar. We changed this from a normal Zoom approach after the request of Marc Michael Epstein to have a little bit of a different flair, a different approach, I guess, to today's third in our three-part series. The three-part series entitled Inside the Jewish Mind. The subtopic for the final in the three-part series is we're taking you on a tour, Jewish tours of heaven and hell. Is there any cost for this tour?
It's just your immortal soul.
That's all it is?
Yeah.
Please put that into the chat. Put your immortal soul into the chat. Happy first Sunday in June, everybody. This is live from Poughkeepsie, as you all know, center of the COVID pandemic in America. And
close to it. We're close to New Rochelle, where it all started.
And there's lots of people outside Mark's office at the moment rioting. So if you hear noises, broken windows, you know that Poughkeepsie is where it's at. This program, as Mark, for some reason, jumped the gun and mentioned, is underwritten by a generous grant from Terry and Tony McDonald. Thank you, McDonald's. And it's co-sponsored by Peter Mesnick and Temple Beth Shalom of Needham, Massachusetts. Welcome, everybody from Boston. Upcoming programs I wanted to mention. So this is Mark's finale. So it's the finale of our of Mark's Sunday series, but Sundays are not lost. We have other series. Paul Lips comes back in July. Before we hit July, so next Sunday, we have a program with, I kind of went ahead there. Next program, we have a program called The Last Laugh. I'm going to show you a trailer so you get an idea of what we'll be doing, what we'll be exploring with a award-winning filmmaker and cinematographer of The Last Laugh. Before I get there, next week, Tuesday through Thursday, Peter Geffen is our 19th annual CSP Summer Scholar. If you're a CSP member or are willing to pay a nominal fee, you may join us. It's a very timely topic. When Peter and I chose the topic, we didn't know what was going to happen in America at this time. The first in the three-part series, A Young Jew in the Civil Rights Movement, a personal story from 1965 through 66, followed by 2 sessions on spiritual humanism and Abraham Joshua Heschel. I can hear someone. So please make sure that you are all muted. Thank you. And then, so next week we'll be taking up with that. We hit the Sunday program I just mentioned that I'll do an ad. And the following Sunday, we have Adolfo Reutman. He's head of the Dead Sea Scrolls Project in Israel at the Jerusalem Museum. He'll be speaking to us. And then we have a program with Rafi Zaram, who will be joining us for a topic about Churchill and the Jews. So lots coming up. I hope you will join us. I'm just going to take a moment to make sure everyone here is muted. If you're not muted, please do so. Okay, so we're going to try something here. I'm going to show you a quick video to get you ready for next Sunday. If you haven't signed up yet, please do. And join us for The Last Laugh, Taboos in Comedy. Let's give it a shot. Actually, hold on. I have to,
no one's getting laid after have been sent to assassinate Hitler.
The doctor arrives, and who is it? It's Dr. Mengele.
Oh my God, that's awful and hilarious. It's awful hilarious.
Subjects come up that are seemingly inappropriate for comedy, and that's the place that's the most interesting to explore.
You don't want to walk out on stage and go, let's talk about Auschwitz. No one's getting laid after that show.
Are there things that go over the line? Yeah, I'm sure that there are.
If I was standing on line naked for the gas chambers, would I hold my stomach in?
Whoa! Humor healed us. My mother would laugh like I never saw her laugh.
The Holocaust is not funny, but survival, there can be humor in that.
That was how
my mother spoke. For you, I lived through Hitler. You can't make the bed.
Without humor, I don't think we would have survived.
Did you talk about how funny the camp was?
Oh, God, yes. We laughed to say, ha, 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 ha. You'll get you there.
It's much more fun to laugh than not to laugh.
By ridiculing the Nazis, he was taking away their power.
You're ashamed that you laughed at it, but you're laughing because it's like you can't help yourself.
Just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing.
Comics have to tell us who we are, where we are, even if it's in bad taste.
It's important to talk about things that are taboo. Otherwise, they just stay in this dark place and they become dangerous.
You cannot live in the shadow. I enjoy life. Could Hitler imagine that I will survive and have 3 great-grandchildren? I mean, that's my revenge. It was funny.
Did that work?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a little preview as to what's coming up next Sunday. We'll be meeting with and talking to the filmmaker, the award-winning filmmaker and cinematographer, Fern Perlstein, about that movie and challenges of humor and humor on the edge and taboo. We are going back now to Marc Michael. Marc is the winner of the 2015 Jewish Book Award in Visual Arts for Skies of Parchment, Seas of Ink, Jewish Illuminated Manuscripts. Marc is the product of a mixed marriage between the scions of Slonimer and Lubavitcher Hassidim and Romanian socialists, and grew up rather confused but happy in Brooklyn, New York. He's currently professor of religion at Vassar College, where he has been teaching since 1992 and was the first director of Jewish studies. At Vassar, he teaches courses on medieval Christianity, religion, arts, politics, and Jewish texts and sources. He is a graduate of the Oberlin College and received his PhD from Yale University, did much of his graduate research at Hebrew University. He has written numerous articles and 3 books on various topics in visual and material culture produced by, for, and about Jews. So Marc, you are with us. Today we're on the webinar, as I mentioned to people. Try not to use the chat feature. If you have questions as we go along, use the Q&A and we'll try to get to questions. Our topic is Jewish Tours of Heaven and Hell, which is the 3rd in your 3-part series. So I guess my first question is, do Jews
I want to ask a question. I want to tell a story.
You want to tell a story? Go ahead.
Ja, I want to tell a story. Der Rebbe ist gestorben und ist in Gan Eden gewesen. Oh, sorry. You want English, right? Okay.
That'd be good. Yes.
Okay, so the Rebbe dies and he goes to heaven. And the Hassidim, they need to ask a dream question, which is a ritual where you go to sleep meditating on a question and you have a dream that gives you the answer. And because they want to know, was is Gan Eden beim Rebbe? Which means, what is the Rebbe's heaven like? So one of the Hasidim, he does the ritual, he goes to sleep, he has the dream, and he ascends. And there he sees a beautiful field, like a green field stretching all the way into the distance. And there in the green field, there are golden palanquins. You know what is a palanquin? It's not a bird. It's like a palace, a little palace, right? Golden palanquins. And in the middle of the biggest golden palanquin, there's a gigantic heart-shaped bed with red sheets. And on the bed, there's a blonde. And the Rebbe is, I really won't describe what the Rebbe is doing with the blonde, but you can use your imagination to understand this. And the Chassid is aghast, appalled, and he expostulates. I think the Rebbe was also expostulating, but that's another story. He expostulates. He says, "Das ist Gan Eden beim Rebbe? This is the Rebbe's paradise?" And a voice comes out of heaven. And it says, "Nein, das ist Gehenna beim Schickse." This is hell for the blonde, right? So heaven and hell, right? Relative terms. And as we always say in the religion biz, your mileage may vary. Questions, Harry? Do you have any questions?
I do. I happen to have a list of questions that I prepared last night at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my
So
God.
let me start with the obvious question.
I'm sweating here. 1 second. Okay.
The obvious question.
Yes.
Do Jews believe in heaven and hell?
That's a big question. So the answer is very simple. Yes and no.
Thank you.
Right. That is, some Jews some of the time, and other Jews none of the time. And it is very much a condition of history and where we stand. you know, if you go back to the biblical period, you are looking at a universe that looks somewhat different than the universe that we might imagine it. Just if we put together what it says in the Torah with what it says in Tehillim and Psalms and what the prophets describe of their world, they imagine the world as a sort of half dome with the earth, which they imagined as round, by the way. They weren't flat earthers. They called it Kadur Haaretz, the sphere of the earth. And on the earth, there were high places and low places, and seas, and mountains. And the mountains consisted of a couple of kinds. A couple of kinds of mountains just existed where they existed, but other mountains held up what was called the firmament, which is this membrane they imagined surrounding the atmosphere. And inside the firmament, you had the sun, the moon, the stars, clouds, and then these openings called the windows or doors of heaven. And above the firmament, what was called the waters above the firmament, which is why the sky appeared blue, because there was water below, mayim, and water above, sham mayim, shamayim, heavens, there is water. And above that, the seven heavens, which we'll describe, and then in the heaven of the heavens, God dwells, right? And then below the earth, there is a deep, deep well called the abyss. And as you go into the abyss, first you pass through Sheol, which is an area we'll talk about in a second. It's the underworld, or the equivalent of Hades, or and then below that, the foundations of the earth, and then the great Tehom Rabbah, the great deep. So when we talk about heaven and hell, we have to realize that we're talking about, at least in the Bible and for the rabbis of the Talmud, a world that looked different, and which heaven and hell were actual sort of physical locations and part of that world. Now, Jewish belief on this subject ranges from that very physical heaven and hell all the way through post-modernity, where, you know, many people say, you know, dead is dead, there is no afterlife, right? The 19th century reform rationalist belief that eliminated any reference to the resurrection of the dead, et cetera, et cetera. The idea that there is no world beyond this one, right? And this was a legitimate development, but really the opposite end of the spectrum from a physical heaven and hell. And in between, Ari, we have a variety of ways of thinking about heaven and hell that will be the subject of our conversation.
So before we go to other questions, was this map that you have right here, did the rabbis get this from other surrounding cultures? Because from my learning with the rabbis, they tended to look at what was around them and take it and make it Jewish. So where did this come from?
Chas v'chalila, God forbid, everything the rabbis did come directly from God, from the Eibishter, straight into their brains and their hearts. There was nothing that they took from the society around them. None of the rabbis ever would wear a bow tie. No, you're absolutely right. You know, rabbinic culture was like every other culture. In fact, they said of themselves, Torah dibra b'lishon b'nei Adam. Torah speaks in human language. And human language means contextual language, where I am at a particular point in history. Now, the Israelite description, the biblical description of this cosmology, as we call it, this map of the cosmos, is really very, very old. It might be 4,000 or 5,000 years old. Greco-Roman stuff came much later. If this bears resemblance to anything, it bears resemblance to Akkadian and Babylonian views of the universe. And it was the Akkadian, Babylonian, and Israelite views of the universe that preceded and in fact influenced the Greco-Roman culture. So by the time the rabbis appeared on the scene, from, let's say, the 2nd century to maybe the 5th or 6th century, they were ahead of the game. Their cosmology had been adopted and adapted by the Greeks and Romans, but they did in fact adopt and adapt part of Hellenistic or Greco-Roman culture about angels and demons for sure, as we'll discuss when we get to those.
So, my understanding of Judaism is that we're a worldly religion. We do focus much more on this world. You rarely do find discussions of the heaven and hell in our tradition. So if so, why did Jews even care about heaven and hell?
Okay, good. So I would put a firmer point on that. It's a good question, and it's fair to say that in the 21st century, with the exception of people like Gershon Winkler or Aryeh Ben Lev or your own wait a second, it just eluded me. Who wrote the book in your community? Somebody wrote a book on
Ellie Spitz.
Oh, Ellie Spitz, of course. Yeah, I knew it was Ellie. I knew it was somebody in the community, right? Ellie Spitz's excellent book.
Rabbi Ellie Spitz.
Yeah. Yes. Rabbi Ellie Spitz's excellent book, which I use, by the way, in my classes. So, it's few and far between. And in fact, in the earliest period, in the Bible itself, very little is made of the afterlife. You would have to, walk a long row through biblical texts before you discovered anything about the afterlife or the resurrection of the dead or what happens to souls, right? And there's a variety of opinions, of course. In the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, I've been everywhere. I've seen everything. The human beings, animals, there's really no soul. A person dies and they rot in the earth. There's no difference between human beings and animals. Everything is a crock, right? So you have that attitude. And then you have intimations in the book of Daniel and other places of souls and bodies. And this is complicated, Ari, by the fact that in the biblical period and the rabbinical period, there was very little thought given to the separation of soul and body. Very little thought given to that distinction. So, for instance, when you say the word nephesh in biblical Hebrew, it's often translated as the soul or the spirit, right? But really it means a life. Right? So, sometimes people will translate a la King James, with 70 souls did our ancestors go down to Egypt. But what it really means is a group of 70 people, right? A group of 70 living, breathing things, nephesh is to breathe, right? Went down to Egypt. So this issue of, do human beings have souls? Are they separate from bodies? Took a long time to develop. It developed in the Middle Ages in response to stuff that was going on in Christianity. So I would say that at the very beginning of Israelite history in the Bible, very little attention paid to this stuff. In our time, relatively little attention paid to this stuff. But in the Middle Ages, the early modern period, the Gaonic period before that, a very lively discussion. Now, it also depends on time of life. I've heard rabbis say to me that when they were young and they didn't deal much with death and their congregants were all, either their age or a little older, in a growing congregation, they didn't give much thought to life after death or heaven and hell. But as they aged and the people around them aged, they realized that to bring comfort to the dying and to give some meaning to end life issues, it's important to talk about these things, whether we construct very elaborate heavens and hells and processes for getting into them or staying out of them, as the case may be, or we are agnostic, right? Or we try to think about this in logical terms, which is hard to do. It's often very necessary, and it's a basic human instinct to think about heaven and hell. So I would say that it's not exactly accurate that Jews never think about these things, but they are downplayed in light of the importance of the worldly experience among Jews. Having said that, it's also important to think about what the universe is, how is it structured, and in particular, is life just an unremitting series of coincidences and happenstance, or is it in fact somehow directed, and do our actions matter? Because the actual foundations of the ideas of heaven and hell are in our moral choices, right? Heaven, as we know, is a place where people who have been good go, and hell is a place where people who have been bad go, right? Now, if you take that literally, that's one thing. If you take it theoretically, it's another. But both those literal and theoretical constructs are built upon the idea that we have some agency in our future, even after this life. And that's why heaven and hell, besides the cosmic map of showing where everything is in the universe, morally, heaven and hell were very important to people.
And I think we'll get at the end to the difference between Judaism and Christianity on this,
Sure.
because Christianity seems to have taken a completely different path than the one you just mentioned for Judaism.
Yes.
But question about the Kabbalah. We have Danny Matt coming to do a series called Gems of the Zohar
Very nice.
in July.
Gems of the Zohar, the best
not
gems.
Gems.
Oh,
gems.
Gems.
And
yes.
does the Zohar spend a lot of time on this?
Well,
the Kabbalistic text spend a lot of time
what's interesting is, let me give you a little typology of what we're going to look at,
on this?
and I'll talk about what the Zohar does as part of that. So, when we looked at our map, you'll note that there's a place called Sheol, and there's a place called the heaven of the heavens where God resides, but there's no place called heaven, and there's no place called hell. That's because those places were not given names in the Bible. But in rabbinic literature and throughout history, we developed these concepts. So first of all, we have Gan Eden. Now, Gan Eden is tricky because to use the term Gan Eden, Ari, about heaven implies what about the biblical place called the Garden of Eden? What would you say? Since I'm now using this term in rabbinic and medieval literature to refer to heaven, what does it want us to do with Genesis then?
Takes Genesis out of what we all think of it as being an earthly place.
Bingo.
Puts it into a ethereal location, which is
right,
really not in the pshat of the reading of the story.
Excellent. So in Genesis, Gan Eden is somewhere Mikedem, east, right? But Kedem also means early, right? So it's Gan Eden is a place, but it's also a time, right? And the rabbis and the medievals brilliantly add to this that Gan Eden is a metaphoric state, in fact, right? Now, what that does is it eases the need to think about Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, in Genesis in any literal way. And in fact, this makes people like Maimonides very happy. Maimonides didn't want us to think of the first several chapters of Genesis as anything other than metaphoric, because he felt that they contradicted science and that they were highly problematic in terms of logic, but they had deep, maybe the deepest moral lessons to teach us, right? In Gan Eden, for instance, human beings are absolutely equal in terms of sex, gender, right? Male and female are both in the image of God, and the image of God itself is male and female, comprises the entire spectrum of sex and gender, right? So that's an ideal. That's not the way the world actually exists, right? But that's an ideal. And when Joni Mitchell says famously, we got to get back to the garden, right? Gan Eden becomes this place of aspiration rather than historical representation. So that's Gan Eden. And Gan Eden was eventually, and I think under the influence of what was going on in the world of Mesopotamia and later reinforced by Greco-Roman cosmologies, divided into 7 levels, 7 different levels. And this is because of the human need to categorize things. But
sorry, who divided them? Who came up with these 7 levels?
The rabbis came up with this, but the earliest mystical strand that we have, called Hechalot mysticism, which is way before the Zohar. This is like the 2nd through 3rd and 4th century, maybe the 1st also, in which the mystic would undergo some ritual, usually involving hyperventilation or the use of burning cannabis or other substances. Sometimes this occurred in the temple courtyard in Jerusalem, and it was a very elite group of people, and one mystic would ascend, or actually it's called descend, to the chariot. And the idea is that one would go inside oneself, and there one would find these levels that were up and, so to speak, behind oneself in one's consciousness. And these are given names. All of these names come from the Psalms or from the prophets, and they're now, or from the Bible itself, and they're now attributed to various levels of heaven. So for instance, the first is Vilon or Arafel, and this is governed by an angel, a special angel, an angel that exists forever, called an archangel. Most angels are created every morning and disappear every evening. We'll talk about that. But there are 7 and 4 principal ones who are called archangels. And this is the closest of the heavenly realms to the earth. And this was deemed to be the abode of Adam and Chava, of Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve sinned, this heaven moved up and beyond living human consciousness, and becomes the normal heaven as we think about of it, where souls go after they die. The second heaven is called Rakia, and it is controlled by 2 archangels, Zachariah and Raphael. And this is where Moshe goes, where he visits heaven, and he encounters, according to the Hechalot literature, the angel Nuriel, who stood 300 million miles high, who had a retinue of 50 million angels, all made of fire and water. So angels are beings, as we'll see, made of fire and water. It's where the planets are fastened in the heavens, so to speak, and it's where the angels who fell out of favor with God are imprisoned. That's Rakia. Then Shechakim, right? The Shechakim is where the Garden of Eden eventually moves up to, and when you pass through the first heaven, you end up in the Garden of Eden with the Tree of Life. This is where manna comes down from heaven right? Then a 4th heaven called Ma'on, which has a replica of Jerusalem, complete with the temple and the altar and angels serving as priests. And then Machon, this is where angels who sing songs, hallelujahs to God, live. And then Zavul and Aravot, right? And you keep going up. The highest level is Aravot, of course, and it is the holiest of the 7 heavens, because there the chariot throne of God lives. The 7 archangels are in charge there, and all unborn human souls lie waiting to be born underneath the divine throne. And that's where the seraphim and the kruvim, very special angels that we'll talk about, and the chayot, the angels that bear up the throne of God, dwell, right? And the mystic would ascend through all the heavens and get a glimpse of Aravot, the highest of heavens. So that's heaven, right? And in heaven there are angels. Ari, when you think about angels, how do you imagine them?
Well, we have a baseball team here called the Angels. So it's usually men in outfits playing baseball, but we don't have baseball right now. So I'd have to think of angels a different way. And, the challenge, of course, is I've got children who are angels most of the time. Most of the time. Sometimes. I
have children who are demons.
When they're potty training in my living room.
Yeah, that's not fun.
Angels. Or drawing on the walls and the carpets and the furniture. Well, but angels, mine is those little beings with the wings. Probably a Christian thing, but I know we have Jewish text. Yeah, there we go. That looks like my kids. They don't have wings.
Those angels, right? And angels playing harps, and these winged creatures, and of indeterminate sex, right? One thing you need to know is that angels are always male. They are.
Wait. When you say that, are you saying that in the Jewish tradition, in all traditions? Because
in all traditions, I can't speak for all traditions,
but the ones
Jewish, Christian, and Muslim tradition, they are gendered male and they are unsexed. That is, they don't have genitals, but they present as male. Very interesting for thinking about questions of trans and intersex. And if you've seen the movie Dogma, there's a moment when these angels drop their pants and they end up as being as smooth as Ken dolls down there, right? But they certainly, in the Jewish tradition, angels are not like this. First of all, they exist in hierarchies. So angels are manifestations of the divine will. So when God has a thought or a desire, it is executed by these beings. You might think of them, you might think of them in sort of pseudoscientific terms in the following way. We believe that the air around us is filled with multiple atomic and subatomic particles, which we can't see, but we know they exist as a result of their actions in our world. Well, in antiquity, they believed that too, except that they called these subatomic particles angels, and they understood them to be manifestations of a higher divine will. Angels in general have a single function. They only do one thing at a time. They're inferior to human beings, and they are created each morning and destroyed each evening, except for the 7 archangels, of which 4 are important to us. Michael, who is like God. Gavriel, my strength is God. Uriel, my light is God. Raphael, God heals. These are the 4 principal archangels. And then for the rest, there are 10 levels of angels. And this chart comes from Maimonides. The Zohar, a little bit later in Spain, had a similar hierarchy. And that's one of the things that the Zohar contributes. It's its own hierarchy of angels. And as you get closer and closer to the divine throne, the highest level is Chayot HaKodesh, the creatures of the chariot. And Jewish tradition doesn't have that much of a tradition of depicting angels, but a couple of things we know. Angels are, first of all, in hierarchies. So I'm showing you a Greek Orthodox icon that shows the various levels of angels, dressed differently, accoutred differently. That's how Jews imagine them, although not usually, except in the case of the Ishim, the lowest level of angels, as human-like beings, right?
Just stop you there for 1 second.
Yes.
Do we have these? Do we share the same hierarchy as Christians and Muslims? In other words, do we all have the same hierarchy, or is this the unique hierarchy of Jews?
This is not only the unique hierarchy of Jews, it's the unique hierarchy of Maimonides. So there are 4 or 5 different Jewish hierarchies. They just switch the order a little bit, right?
Right.
Christians have a hierarchy that switches the order somewhat. Muslims have different terminology because it's the Arabic terminology.
Right.
Christians just translated the Hebrew terminology, but they have a slightly different hierarchy. But it doesn't really matter as much as the fact that the closest angelic beings to us are called Ishim, and that's why often in the Bible, when it says, for instance, that Jacob's father sends him to find, Jacob's father sends Joseph, Joseph's father sends Joseph to find his brothers, and he can't find them. It says, Vayimsa'ehu ish, and a man met him. So Rashi says, a man, this was an angel, right? So when an unidentified, quote unquote, ish, man meets you, this is an angel in human garb. And you can tell angels because Ishim, because they give the appearance of being human. And this is also a test for human beings, right? Abraham was hospitable and took care of those angels, even though they appeared to him as 3 wandering, Bedouins, right? As 3 men. That's what's known as entertaining angels unaware. So all the hierarchies have Ishim as the closest to us, and the creatures of the divine throne as the highest.
As an aside, I think we had an Ish Elohim in this past week's Haftorah with Samson.
Yes, you did. And Manoach, that's right. So that was an Ish angel. And then other angels that you might be familiar with, the Kruvim, the cherubs, as they're called, usually depicted in Christian art as little winged babies or just the heads of babies with little wings. The Kruvim are the angels that were on the Ark of the Covenant in the temple in Jerusalem. They consisted of a male and female figure who were embracing each other, as the Gemara says, as a man is sexually with a woman. And they had human faces, the faces of young man and a woman, and bird wings, eagle wings, and some people say the bodies of lions, but they are the second level, and it was from between the outstretched wings of this strange golden sculpture that the divine voice spoke. So those are the cherubim. But
a question from our participants, which relates to what we're doing right now.
Okay.
These words, and Ishim, you've already shown us how it connects to biblical word.
Yes.
Do these other words come from biblical texts?
Every single
all of
one.
them?
Right. Havu Adonai b'nei Elim, sons of the divine beings in the Psalms. Right. You are like divine beings. Malachim, obviously, all these appear in the Psalms and the prophets. But the fact is that Jewish tradition envisions these angels as beings that are made of fire, or fire and water, and that have multiple eyes. In the case of the Ophanim, the wheel angels, which you see here, they're bounded about with eyes, and they're fearsome, awesome kinds of creatures. This is a drawing based on a cover drawing for Madeleine Lang's A Wind in the Door from the Wrinkle in Time series, in which the cherub, or as he's called, a cherubim, because he's a multiple creature, appears as a huddle of wings and eyes. And this is by a wonderful artist. You should actually get this person to speak, Ezra Rose, who is a queer postmodern graphic designer and artist. So angels, and this is, of course, the oldest symbol for angels, a particular angel. It is, before it became the so-called Jewish star, or the Star of David, or the Shield of David, it was the symbol of Tophafiel, who was the angel of divine transmission of Torah. And in fact, there are ancient formulae where people would adjure this angel and ask him to help one complete the study of Torah. And it's a symbol, it's an angelic symbol, because the upward pointing triangle is the symbol in chemistry and alchemy, right, and of fire, and the one coming down is the symbol of water, right? And you have this interlocking of fire and water. And angels are described in medieval poetry as sarim blule esh v'mayim, officials or princes of mixed fire and water. That is a concilium oppositorum, a conjunction of and a resolution of opposites.
So before you leave that image, go back 1 second. So how old is that image, and how do you know, I mean, not to Twitter fact check you right now, but where are these facts from that this symbol was used for an angel? Like, how do we know that?
So we have old magical manuscripts from the 900s and 1000s, 900s and the thousands, in which this symbol is ascribed to Tophafiel. And this symbol is found, it doesn't become a symbol for Jews or Judaism until maybe the 1600s in Prague. Before that, it was a magical symbol. And so here, in a manuscript that was written around 1300, we have this image of the temple with symbols of the Torah, including an elephant, which is a symbol of the Torah. If you don't know that, you should, and that's something we can talk about at another time. But the elephant is bounded in this symbol of the angel of the Torah, and this is the opening of the book of Deuteronomy, which is called Mishneh HaTorah, the repetition of the Torah. So, so the Zohar refers to the angel Tophafiel, by the way, since you're interested in the Zohar.
We can ask Danny Matt. So a challenge to our audience, if anybody knew that this symbol was representative of an angel, please put it in your Q&A so I can be very impressed. Okay, you keep going.
Okay. So then we come to hell, right?
You mean the current world we're in, or you mean in your discussion?
Well, yeah, somebody, I can't make political jokes, right? No. Okay, I won't make any political jokes.
CSP, it doesn't take any sides in contemporary.
That's right, we don't take any sides in this
saga we're living in.
Yes, this marriage show in which we live. Okay, then we come to hell, right? So hell is a little trickier. It's an odd word, Gehinom. It comes from Ge Ben Hinnom or Gehinom. Sometimes it's called Gehenna. And in fact, it makes its way into Christianity as Gehenna and into the Quran as Jehannam in Arabic. And it refers to a place, you know this, I think some of you, that there was at the time of Jeremiah, outside the city walls of Jerusalem, a place in which human sacrifice was conducted. In that place, as you can imagine, there's a lot of screaming, there was a lot of burning, there was a lot of smoke, there was a lot of terrible smells, and a lot of people were burnt to death. And that became a sort of metaphor or analog for the idea of hell. And but hell, before the idea of Gehinnom, which developed in the Hellenistic world, in the Greco-Roman world, before that, Jews had a sort of parv underworld. You remember this map in which Sheol is a place under the earth. It's not pleasant, I grant you, to be under the earth. Some of us may feel that in isolation in our bunkers, we have been that way for the past 9.5 weeks or so, but Sheol is a Hades-like place where souls sort of wander after death in an indeterminate way. And you mentioned Sheol as an unpleasant place to end up. So that, for instance, in the Bible, when Jacob is brought the bloodied coat of his ostensibly, his son who was ostensibly torn apart by a wild beast, he says to his sons, do you want to bring my gray head down to Sheol? In other words, kill me, why don't you, right? So Sheol was just a place that people went after death with no particular value judgment placed on it, let's say. But eventually, besides Gehinnom, I'm sorry, the slide is a little bit, the tabs are a little bit messed up. There were a number of names throughout the Middle Ages for hell, as hell became increasingly a place of torture and punishment, and we'll discuss why in a second. So, Abaddon, Be'er Shahat, Tita Yaven, Sha'arei Mavet, Salmavet. Some of these come from the Psalms, Gam Ki Elech, Begei Salmaves, Psalm 23, even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, right? Or Tita Yaven is mentioned in Jeremiah the prophet, or the pit of corruption. They're biblical names, and these were just names of hell. But hell also had all of these different regions, right? Some of them in these what are called apocalypses. Just as there were books in the Hellenistic period that described the ascent into the seven heavens, there were also books that described tours of hell, like the first, second, third, and fourth books of Enoch. Some of these are preserved in Greek. Some of them we found little Hebrew pieces of, and some of them are preserved only in Ethiopic, right? And so you can just see, I won't go through them. I mean, my favorite, of course, is Soar Otachat, boiling excrement, which is punishment. Obviously, each of these are punishments, different levels of a punishing hell as described.
So before you move on,
yes.
We had, at the beginning, you had levels of heaven,
right?
Which we went through, and you're saying that then later on, they evolved as levels of hell as well, or they kind of evolved similar time?
Right, so this is a result of Neoplatonism. So Neoplatonism was the great Wi-Fi innovation of the Hellenistic period. By Wi-Fi innovation, I mean is if you look up at the top corner of your computer and you can see the Wi-Fi signal, right? And it starts with a dot and then it gets in increasingly wider arcs. It was very fashionable in Neoplatonic circles to think about God as a point at infinite distance from us, who emanated out God's godliness in increasingly large, but increasingly, therefore, diluted connection to us, okay? And so also, heaven and hell began to be thought of in Neoplatonic terms as having some deepest, darkest pit or highest, most empyrean height. And to get to there, you start closest to us and you move in further and further and further.
Right, and then the Jewish tradition of saying Kaddish, I thought was related to what we're talking about now. So I don't know if I'm jumping the gun on that, but
so you may be jumping the gun, but it's important. It's important to note that originally Gehenna was not a place of, Sheol was not a place of torture. Gehenna became a place of torture, and torture was meted out to people there in greater or lesser degrees. So the lesser degrees in Gehenna were just separation from the world and from God. That could be pretty bad, right? You know, if you've ever experienced it on earth, separation from the world or separation from God can be painful. And of course, as the Middle Ages wore on and Jews were more and more influenced by Christianity, this sort of very explicit, graphic, you know, boiling excrement kinds of hells. And so what was gradually understood, I think, under the influence of Greco-Roman ideas was the idea that the body spends 12 months decomposing underground and atoning for sins, because we all commit sins, in Gehenna, during which you do not burn in the worst levels of the fire if your loved one says Kaddish, right? So every time your loved one says Kaddish, it redeems you from torture. You're just separated from God, right? I mean, obviously this belief was a way to get your loved ones to say Kaddish for you, right? But no person is said to be so bad as to need the full 12 months, which is why traditional Jews only say Kaddish for 11 months, right? Kaddish is a way of bringing people up to higher and higher levels. And every year on the Yortzeit Kaddish is said as a means of helping the soul ascend to God. Now, this all sounds very mystical and abstract and irrelevant to modern rationalist people. But if you think about it, I just came back from a memorial service for a beloved mentor of mine who passed away. Was one of my graduate advisors, Walter Kahn, great art historian, Jewish. He discovered, actually, he was an orphan in the Second World War, and discovered while I was his graduate student that his parents had perished in Auschwitz. So while he was a completely secular Jew, he started to ask questions about Kaddish and what he should do for his parents. And what I realized then was that Kaddish is this way of connecting the dead with the living and a way of perpetuating memory. You know, because face it, I always ask my students this: do you know the names of all 8 of your great-grandparents? Now, some of you who are genealogy buffs may know them, right? I don't. I'm a historian of Judaism, right? I don't know the names of all 8 of my great-grandparents. That is their names, let alone what they look like, because we don't have photographs, or what they did or where they lived. A couple of stories about some of them, but all 8, no, absolutely no. If you don't know the names of your 8 great-grandparents, how can anything that you do in this world, good or bad, be possibly so good or so bad? You know what I'm saying? So Kaddish is a way of remembering those people, at least during the lifetimes of the people who had contact with them in life. And it is, and the metaphor of pulling somebody away from the pit of utter destruction is an apt metaphor.
Good.
Any other? I mean, we have several. I could go on for 3 hours here, but I know we have an hour.
No, let's move on.
Okay, so
the devil, I think.
The devil, Satan, right? The devil, right? So you know that the devil is not mentioned in Hebrew scriptures. There's only one book, the book of Job, which is a strange book about a non-Jewish guy who lives in the land of Uz, which is like Yenemsville, and God plays dice with this guy and says, look. God plays dice with one of his angels, and that angel is called the Satan, the angel that hinders people, that tests people. And this angel is under the jurisdiction of God, and this angel's task under divine mandate is to test people. And so Satan really is the tool of God. Later in history, in the Hellenistic period, the Greeks had this idea of a diabolos, who was sort of an anti-God. And so by the time you get to the New Testament, to the Greek scriptures, you have Satan set up as an anti-God, almost heretically, because of course there is only one God in the universe and everything is under that God's jurisdiction. And what happens is that Satan begins to acquire an independent life of his own, and Satan appears with an entire retinue of shedim, of demons, right? And the demons are a lot of fun. You think the angels are fun. The demons are fun. Here's Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire Infernal, a 19th century depiction of 72 different kinds of demons and descriptions, many of them from Hebrew lore. You see them. This one, Leonard, I think is particularly cute.
I think he's one of our donors.
Yes, oh, please.
Leonard.
Right. Did you have to sell your soul, Ari? Or was that already sold? So demons are the retinue of Satan. And what happens in Judaism is that in the rabbinic period, demons are taken very seriously. You're told not to go to the bathroom at night in a secluded place because the demons will attack you, right? People took them very seriously. They created these demonic bowls on which spells were written, and you drink water out of them to destroy the demons, et cetera, et cetera. But by the late Middle Ages and early modern period, you begin to see demons just as angels acting as intermediaries for God. This is the Venice Haggadah of 1605. I'm sorry, 1506, excuse me. And I've translated it here for you. I left the original framework. And of course, in the Haggadah, it talks about a band of evil angels. And so the illustration on the bottom of the page shows demoni deputati sopra gli alimenti per dare a Mitzriim pene e tormente. Devils overseeing the elements to give the Egyptians misery and torments. So these devils take the shape of devils in Christian art, right? And one thing that Jews and Christians shared in the Renaissance was a fascination with and a morphology of devils and demons. But of course, the Haggadah also says that the plagues in Egypt were lo yedei malach, were not by an angel or a messenger or by implication a demon, right? So you have this struggle always between the popular mind, which wants to talk about demons, and this voice of authority that says, no, there's only one God in the universe. And I just love Margaret Semach's illustrations for Isaac Bashevis Singer's When Shlomo Went to Warsaw. And a couple of the stories have demons in them, and their demons are these little old Jewish men, sometimes even with tzitzis hanging out of their pants, and they're very adorable. Here's a rabbi confronting a demon, looking very much like a congregant. Margaret Semach, what a wonderful artist she was. And finally, my favorite story of Singer, Tzirtzur and Petzitza, about a young demon who falls in love in a friendly way with a little cricket. And they become fast friends and companions. But at the end, unfortunately, a handsome male imp appears and takes her away above the rooftops. And the cricket is very sad, but eventually they come back and they all live together, and the cricket finds a little cricket mate, right? So this cuteness of demons eventually in Jewish lore, Herschel and the Hanukkah goblins, for instance, is something that becomes pervasive. It's a way of taming the wildness of demons. So in the end, what are we to think about heaven and hell? Imagine there's no heaven, right? Like I said, in the 21st century, we tend to think of heaven and hell as metaphoric. Although heaven and hell took on the flavors of the cultures around the Jews throughout history, in the rational Enlightenment, heaven and hell for Jews also took on the flavors of the Enlightenment environment. And the question of what comes next is a question on which 21st century Jews are justifiably agnostic. I will leave you with a story of my teacher, who is a controversial person. I don't advocate his. I don't condone his behavior in some cases. Reb Shlomo Carlebach, right, who was a great person in very many ways, and a very, very deeply flawed and problematic person in other ways. But he did tell us a story about hell. So once we were learning something in the Zohar, actually, and the Zohar is very explicit about the burning hells. Like if you commit sexual sins, you burn in a vat of your own semen. right? Or a woman will be hung by her breasts from hooks for all eternity. The Zohar is very, very much influenced by Christian.
I don't think we'll be covering that in Gems of the Zohar.
No, we won't. It's not a gem of the Zohar, unfortunately. And we could talk about Christian hells in a second, but I just want to conclude with this. So we asked Reb Shlomo, Rebbe, what is Gehenna? And he looked at us and he kind of chuckled. He scoffed. He says, Gehenna, they give you a mirror. That's where I'll end.
Nice, thank you.
So, Ari, you had a question about Christianity, yes?
What's the difference between Jewish and Christian beliefs regarding heaven and hell?
Well, belief is a good thing. You see, belief is a good term. Jews are not required to believe anything about anything, basically, right? You can even not believe that God is a singular and unique being. You just have to behave a certain way in the Jewish community. Nobody is testing the beliefs of Jews. There is no central hierarchy. There is no inquisition. So as long as a Jew behaves orthopraxy, that is, in conformity with the norms of the community, nobody's asking them what they believe, okay? Christianity has, in its various different flavors and incarnations and denominations, has very specific views sometimes of hell that are part of the catechisms, of the dogma statements that one must believe in the religion. And the major reason that one might go to hell in Christianity as opposed to Judaism, one might stay around hell longer on the basis of one's deeds. In Christianity, it has to do with belief. And so the major difference is that for many Christians, not progressive, postmodern Christians, but for many traditionalist Christians, both Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox, someone who rejects the belief in Christ is destined to burn in hell for all eternity, right? And this is something that Catholicism addressed in the Second Vatican Council and tried to smooth out, but it's still pervasive in some Christianities in some places, and it certainly was over time that the ultimate sin that lands one and keeps one in hell is the rejection of the belief in Christ. And that's a very, very big difference. We don't send anybody to hell in Judaism for what they believed. However, when I say we, I don't mean all Jews at all times, because certainly you could find certain Jews in certain times who talked about, these people will go to hell because of what they believe. So Judaism has incredible diversity. Would you care to moderate some of the questions that have come in?
Yeah, just one last question. In the modern world, where you talked about our rational approach to heaven and hell versus the historical development that you showed us, that you laid out, we still have, obviously, fundamentalist Jews. So what is their perspective in the Haredi world, for example?
I haven't talked to many Haredim about heaven and hell.
We had a Haredi on this past week. I should have.
Yes, I know.
Bombach.
You could ask him. I'm sure he would tell you it's more metaphoric than real. Yeah. But heaven and hell are really ways of controlling people. So the more you're in a society that is about control, right, the more you're going to want to emphasize the literalness of heaven and hell. So I would be willing to bet that for more ultra-Orthodox people, right, who need a way of holding tighter to people that they feel that they are losing in the postmodern world, heaven and hell is actually becoming increasingly important. But I can't state that with a fact.
Let's see, we'll go through questions. I think Faith Hirschler said she didn't hear what Shlomo Carlebach's statement was about what you see in hell when you're there. Okay. Would you like to repeat that real quick?
Yeah, we asked him, so what is hell? And he scoffed. He said, He said, hell? Gehenna, they give you a mirror. They give you a mirror. M-I-R-R-O-R.
Okay, so think about that. It'll very powerful. Wendy Lupel asks, and that's why the Gentiles, which I don't think it's necessarily Gentiles, I would say certain Christians think that Jews will burn in hell. It's because we don't accept their theology, and under certain theology, anybody who doesn't accept Jesus as
God,
anybody like that will stay in hell. Is that correct?
Correct. In other words, you could be the best human being in the world, but you fail to connect with the point of the universe, which is to acknowledge Jesus as God.
Do demons appear a lot in our art?
In
art,
art,
you showed the Haggadah, but
yeah, in art occasionally. I'm working actually on animal-headed humans. I worked for a while on griffin-headed humans who are not demonic. I have some animal-headed humans who might be demonic, but where they do appear is in folk tales. In a book called, for instance, the Misa book, a medieval book of tales, there are rabbis who turn into werewolves and demons who seduce women. And by the way, just want to tell you, husbands or wives, if you suspect that your spouse is having sex with a demon, and by this I mean a demon who is not you. Okay, you demon.
Thank you.
Right, okay, you get that. Okay, you suspect your spouse is having sex with a demon, this is what you do. According to medieval Jewish law, you spread flour or cornmeal around the bed before you go to sleep. And if you see the imprints of chicken feet in the cornmeal or the bread, that means that your spouse is actually a demon, because a demon's feet can manifest as human during the day, but will turn into the feet of fowl during the night.
It's very helpful.
Well, that's why I'm on my second marriage.
Right. So going back to the art, so why is it that you showed us the images of these horrible, horrific, or scary-looking creatures, whether they're angels or demons, but the angels that we see in the Christian art are these beautiful, cherubic, and someone said actually they are male and female in Christian. I don't know if that's true.
No, they're not. They're
right? always male.
The problem is this: that in Florence, in the 1400s, when you wanted to show a beautiful young boy, you showed him with long, flowing golden locks and effeminate features. So that really has to do more with homosocial desire than it does with the sex of angels. If you read Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologia, the volume De Angelorum, it's an extensive.
I usually read that every night, so I'll.
Well, it is on my bedside table. It is what the nature of angels, and angels are gendered male but not sexed.
But how do we go from the images you showed us from the Jewish text to the pretty young cherubim with the wings?
They're so nice. They want to make everything nice, right? So look at Jesus. Jesus was probably a short, dark, kinky-haired, hook-nosed, Jewy-looking guy. But in Christian art, he's tall and blonde, and he has long, flowing locks, and he's suffering the little children to come unto him in a white robe. In other words, if you are a Western, European, Nordic Christian, you create God and the angels and everybody else in your idealized self-image. By the way, Jews in the Middle Ages in Germany, in their own art, depicted themselves as blonde with flowing locks, right? So, so what? Here's a Jew from the Middle Ages in Northern Europe, right? So he doesn't have blonde flowing locks, but he has flowing locks, right? I turned him into my symbol. That's where you can get a hold of me. Yes, other questions?
Okay, so Alida, we've answered your question. The cherubim are only male, okay? No females, right, Mark? No females.
21st century angelology has plenty of female angels.
Right.
They're all over. If you go over the internet, they're all over. Everybody has a guardian angel and they're whatever. That has nothing to do with traditional angelology.
Out of your area of focus, but it seems that we have a contemporary reemergence of angelology, and I don't know about demonology too, because my daughter watches these shows on television that are all about demons. Is there some phenomenon? Why is this? What's going on from your perspective? Is that
well, it's about control, right? So the Talmud says that you don't have a single blade of grass in the world that doesn't have an angel standing over it and saying, "Grow." Right? So the idea of having angels who guard us, or the idea of having demons who are responsible for these terrible hindrances we find in the world and terrible disruptions, is a ubiquitous human need. And at times and places where we're encountering crises of various kinds, there's a desire to cede, C-E-D-E, to give up agency And that's one of the reasons that we see this happening. I teach a course called Western Esoteric Traditions, and it's a very popular course. Why? Because I teach about angelology, demonology, geomancy, that is using stones for magical purposes, astral projection, tarot, Christian Kabbalah. I teach Jewish Kabbalah as a separate course, chakra imagery, all these things that were part of religious belief in the past that are now relegated to the realm of superstition. But most of them are about the desire to control the universe, and sometimes about the desire to be controlled. Because while we're Americans and we don't want anybody controlling us, sometimes it's good to feel safe in the palm of the hand of a transcendent being.
The evolution of what we talked about, heaven and hell and demons and angels, is it similar to many other Jewish, the evolution of other Jewish theories, traditions? Are we responding to what's around us as opposed to be like the first lecture where people asked about art? Where are the Jewish artists? Or where's our art? And you said, well, we look at what's around us and we're just taking the art that's there and we're making it Jewish in our way. Yes. Is that what's going on with heaven and hell? Angels and demons?
But with the following caveat, okay? It's always in response to what's going on, but there's a lot going on. And what's chosen from that panoply or smorgasbord, right, is what either fits in with or serves as a suitable pendant to, or I won't say conflicts with, but is the yin of the yang of something that's already present in the tradition, right? So we want people to say Kaddish, so we borrow this idea of souls being in purgatory, right? That develops in the 13th century in Christianity. And in Christianity, you go to a priest, you get penance, you do your penitential stuff, and the soul rises another level out of purgatory. We do the same thing with Kaddish, but it's not just because we like that idea. It's because we saw that Kaddish was important, and we wanted people to say it. And so we developed an idea we already had in the rabbis, right, of this Gehenna as this place where this antechamber to the next world. And we developed it in a way that grew up in parallel to the idea of indulgences and dispensations and penance in Christianity.
Thank you. Howard Mirowitz, one of our very important donors, wants to know, can we get copies of your slides? Because there's so much great information in it, he wants to review it.
Oh, okay. I mean, the one I did today is a nothing thing.
Okay, so the answer is yes.
For this one, yes.
Yes.
I'll send it to you.
Monty Krieger asked two questions. One, and I'm trying to wrap it up pretty soon, but since we started a little late, we had that video. I'm giving us a little time. Why is it, Monty asked, do we only have certain people who can say Kaddish? If Kaddish is something that's really important, why do we have Kaddish only being said by certain people who are related to the person who passed away, as opposed to a friend, a neighbor, any thoughts on that?
So or why can't we say Kaddish alone, or with 9 people, or with right? So in Judaism, if we accept the premise that it has a legal structure, we have to create a legal boundary for each act. So I say to you, on Passover, you're supposed to eat matzah. So your question should be, because it's a legal structure, well, what does it mean to eat matzah? How much matzah would it be? How must I eat it? In what amount of time, right? So all these things become important because we want to create a structure that is appropriate for communities, not simply for individuals. So the answer to that question is anybody can say Kaddish for anybody. Anybody can say Kaddish for anybody. Any number of people can say Kaddish for anybody. You can say Kaddish by yourself. But it only, quote unquote, works, that is within the framework of what Kaddish is, if it is according to the particular laws. So the particular laws are derived in one way or another from the Bible. So in the Bible, we see the families, the immediate families of people mourning for them. In the Bible, we see that a group that's called a prayer group is constituted of 10 people traditionally, right? So we adopt those things to Kaddish in order to pull Kaddish into the ambit, into the realm of what, giving it a legal viability, okay? So if we just told people, you're going to drive your cars around, and when you think you should stop, when it looks dangerous to go, then stop. we'd have a lot of chaos, and some people would get hurt and some people wouldn't, and but if we say stop at the red, we've created a framework or a boundary that is a communal norm for ourselves. And as in all things legally in Judaism, that's what happens with Kaddish. But can you say Kaddish with somebody for yourself? Yes. Can you say it with 9 people? Yes. Is it Kaddish the way Kaddish is said in the synagogue? No. It's saying the words of the prayer. But Kaddish operates on 2 levels, as does everything in Judaism. The communal legal framework way and the personal emotional connection way.
Very nice. Monty Krieger has a question. He thought that there was an he asked whether human sacrifice really happened, or is it something that we talk about but didn't really happen?
Okay, good question. This question arises with cannibalism also, because, up to the 19th century, people were saying, oh, there are these cannibals in various places, and right? And there's a dispute among anthropologists what cannibalism means, et cetera, et cetera. So what was human sacrifice? Did they burn people alive? Did they kill them first in some ritual? Did they drug them and then burn them? It's very hard to know. It seems from a variety of archaeological gravesite information that there were places in which people were ritually killed, right? Was it a regular thing? Was it pervasive in particular cultures? That you'd have to ask the anthropologists of those particular cultures. When the prophets describe, the burning of children to Moloch, right? It's questionable whether that was going on in their time period or not.
Okay, a few other quick ones. Ellen Prince asked you a question that you will not answer now because it's the subject of a whole different program. I thought that Jews did not draw humans because people were formed in the image of God, i.e. also there's apparently a restriction on doing art, but that's a whole different program. So
it's not only a different program. I wouldn't make a living if I couldn't talk about Jews painting human beings. So I could be very quick and tell you that the second commandment, which is what you're citing, prohibits only the creation of 3-dimensional images that one would worship. So you can create any 2-dimensional image, and you can even create 3-dimensional images as long as you don't worship them. That's the whole.
That's the whole lecture. Okay, you gave away a whole
lecture. It's done.
Karen Zilberstein asked actually a good question. Was the golem a demon?
No. The golem was a robot, right? The golem was an artificial anthropoid human. And in fact, I'd like to give a talk on a series on the Dybbuk, the golem, and various kinds of demons to make distinctions between those. So.
Okay, if you want that as a topic, email me or text me, and we'll bring Mark back. Mike Rubin asks if Gehenna, the concept of hell as a place of punishment, was present prior to the destruction of the Second Temple. In other words, when did these different theories that you mentioned?
All of this stuff comes in probably 1st, 2nd century. In other words, at the same time that Christianity which was a sect of Judaism, absorbing this idea of the devil and hell, Judaism was also absorbing it, but it was the constituency of Judaism remained Israelites. The constituency of Christianity branched out to various Hellenistic Greco-Romans who had already these other concepts. And so these, I would say, these more extreme or wilder concepts of heaven and hell developed with greater strength in the same period among Christians, but after the destruction of the temple.
We will have Adolfo Reutman with us, the head of the Dead Sea Scroll Project in Israel, but he will probably be the right person to answer this question. But do we know if the Dead Sea Scrolls referenced any of the angels, devils?
Oh yeah, there are in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
There are certain kinds of references to mystical beings, but mostly to human quasi-mystical beings. So the sons of light and sons of darkness refer to actual people. And the teacher of righteousness, who has the characteristics of a pseudo-divine being, is actually a messianic human figure. So that's a good question for Reutman. I think he'd be interested to answer that.
Last question is from Howard Mirowitz. What is the right way to view angels in Judaism with respect to their autonomy? And if they don't act autonomously, where did Christianity get the concept of Lucifer from? So do we have a different approach?
Right. So first of all, the concept of Lucifer is a Jewish concept. in Isaiah, Isaiah speaks to a being and says, how far have you fallen, brilliant one, son of the morning, light-bearing one, son of the morning. The name given to this being is Hillel. Hillel means Lucifer, light-bearer. Ben Shachar, son of the dawn. And the Midrash on that says that at the very beginning of time, when God created the human being, right, God asked the angels to bow down to the human being, and they all bowed down to the human being, except this particular angel who thought of himself as quite exalted, the light bearer, Lucifer. Lux is light bearer, like Christopher, Christ bearer, Lucifer, light bearer, right? And this angel, Hillel ben Shachar, did not bow down and therefore was cast out of heaven. And from then on, angels had no free will. So like human beings, right? Human beings were created not to have free will, and they ended up having free will. Angels were created to have free will, and they ended up not having free will. However, with that, all due respect to the Midrash, it seems from other commentators that Hillel ben Shachar is a reference to Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the temple. It's just it's a cognomen or a nickname for Nebuchadnezzar. So it may not be about angels at all. But it's an excellent question. As of this moment, angels, existing as they do on some plane other than ours, have no free will, no autonomy, etc. In fact, they are destroyed each evening. There's only the 7 that remain.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed our tour to heaven and hell with our docent, Professor Marc Michael Epstein.
Tour guide, yeah.
We wish only for all of you a heavenly experience.
I knew you'd get to that.
And I will end by saying it is known, it is factual, that those who donate to educational nonprofits and become members of their legacy circle live longer. Gives them more opportunities to do good on earth and achieve and get up to the highest level of what Marc Michael Epstein showed us in heaven. So I only wish the best for all of you, and by donating to us, maybe that will help you. So thank you for those who have donated. Who haven't donated to CSP during this, our 20th annual summer fundraising drive, please consider supporting us so we can bring Marc back. He's got nothing to do. Marc has nothing to do.
What am I going to do? I got dressed up. I'm not wearing pants.
Look at him. He did that just for us. He's a mess otherwise. So please support CSP. I promise we'll bring Marc back if you want. If you don't want Marc back, we will never bring him back. You just
bring somebody
you want.
You want to hear, I know what you want. You want to hear about Israel, Zionism, American Jews, Jews in comedy. You don't want to hear about weird, esoteric, strange things. What do you need me for?
We'll find a, trust me, you donate money to us, we'll find a better teacher.
All right.
Marc, no, you're excellent. Thank you for the trilogy. We will definitely have you back. Thank you, everybody. Happy first Sunday in the month of June.
It was great to talk to such an intelligent interlocutor. Thank you, Ari.
Okay. Have a great day, guys. See you this week with Peter Geffen. Bye-bye.